When Sally Struthers finally spoke openly about her experiences working with Rob Reiner, she did not do so with bitterness or nostalgia, but with a calm honesty that immediately reframed how many people understood him. For years, Rob Reiner had been viewed largely through the lens of his public success, his iconic projects, and his outspoken political views. What Struthers revealed was something far quieter, more human, and in many ways more revealing than any headline or interview he had ever given himself. She explained that behind the scenes, Reiner was nothing like the caricature people often imagined. There was no inflated ego dominating the room, no need to remind others of his authority or legacy. Instead, she described a man deeply attentive to the emotional temperature of a set, someone who noticed discomfort long before it turned into conflict. According to Struthers, Rob had an instinctive awareness of when someone felt overlooked or overwhelmed, and he acted on it without making a show of kindness. What struck her most, she said, was his consistency. The Rob Reiner people saw on camera was essentially the same person they encountered during long shooting days, rehearsals, and quiet moments between takes. He did not perform leadership. He embodied it naturally. If someone made a mistake, he corrected it without humiliation. If tension rose, he diffused it with humor rather than authority. Struthers emphasized that he never ruled by fear, something she had seen far too often in the industry. She recalled moments when younger cast members felt intimidated by the weight of production, unsure of their place, or worried about failing expectations. Rob, she said, had a way of lowering that pressure. He reminded people that the work mattered, but not more than their dignity. That balance, she believed, was why so many people gave their best performances under his direction. Struthers also spoke about how deeply personal Rob's creative process was. He did not separate life from work as rigidly as others did. He listened to stories, absorbed experiences, and carried those insights into how he shaped scenes and characters. He asked questions not to control outcomes, but to understand motivations. In her words, Rob wanted to know why people behaved the way they did. Both on and off screen. One detail that stayed with her was his respect for collaboration. Despite his status, he never treated others as replaceable parts. Crew members, writers, assistants, actors, all mattered to him. He learned names quickly and remembered personal details without effort. For Struthers, this was not a tactic, but a reflection of genuine curiosity and care. She admitted that early on, she had expected a sharper edge. Hollywood had taught her to brace herself around powerful men. Instead, she found someone who listened more than he spoke. When disagreements arose, he did not shut them down. He explored them. He believed that conflict, when handled respectfully, could strengthen a project rather than weaken it. Struthers also addressed Rob's humor, which she described as grounding rather than performative. He did not use jokes to dominate attention. He used them to dissolve anxiety. On difficult days, he cracked dry, understated remarks that reminded everyone they were human before they were professionals. That humor, she said, created trust. Perhaps most revealing was her description of how Rob handled success. He did not cling to praise or chase validation. When a project succeeded, he credited the team. When something failed, he absorbed responsibility without defensiveness. That steadiness made people feel safe around him, especially in an industry driven by insecurity. She also noted his moral clarity. Rob had strong beliefs, but he did not impose them aggressively on others in private spaces. He allowed room for disagreement without withdrawing respect. For Struthers, this was rare and deeply admirable. In the end, what Sally Struthers revealed was not a secret scandal or shocking reversal. It was something quieter and more enduring. Behind the scenes, Rob Reiner was exactly what people hoped he would be, but rarely are. Principled without arrogance, powerful without cruelty, and kind without calculation. That, she said, was the real Rob, the one audiences never saw, but everyone who worked with him remembered. When Sally Struthers continued reflecting on her time around Rob Reiner, she shifted from individual moments to patterns she noticed over years. Patterns that only emerge when someone is observed consistently rather than occasionally. She said that what defined Rob most was not a single act of kindness or leadership, but an accumulation of small, steady behaviors that never seemed designed to impress anyone. They simply existed day after day, regardless of who was watching. She described how Rob approached preparation with a seriousness that never crossed into rigidity. He arrived early, not to assert control, but to ground himself. He liked to walk the set quietly before others arrived, taking in the space, adjusting his mental rhythm, and making sure nothing felt rushed once work began. According to Struthers, that habit alone set a tone of calm that carried through the entire day. People sensed that there's time to do things right. Not just quickly point. One thing she emphasized was how Rob treated vulnerability. Actors, she explained, are often expected to expose emotional truths while pretending that exposure costs nothing. Rob never subscribed to that illusion. He acknowledged that vulnerability was labor, and he treated it with care. If a scene demanded emotional intensity, he checked in afterward, sometimes with words, sometimes simply by giving space. He did not rush people into the next task as if nothing had happened. Struthers recalled a moment when an actor struggled repeatedly with a scene, growing visibly frustrated. Instead of raising his voice or asserting authority, Rob stopped the shoot entirely. He asked everyone to take a break, then spoke privately with the actor. When they returned, the scene changed slightly, adjusted to fit the actor rather than forcing the actor to fit the scene. That flexibility, she said, revealed his priorities. The story mattered, but not at the expense of the person telling it. She also spoke about Rob's relationship with power. He was aware of it, but never intoxicated by it. In meetings, he often listened longer than expected, allowing others to speak fully even when he already had a clear direction in mind. Struthers said that this made people feel invested rather than managed. Decisions still came from Rob, but they felt shared, not imposed. Another detail that stayed with her was how Rob handled mistakes. He did not assign blame reflexively. If something went wrong, his first question was not who caused it, but what could be learned. That approach reduced fear across the set. People took creative risks because they knew failure would not be punished publicly. For Struthers, that environment was rare and precious. She also noted that Rob had a strong sense of boundaries, especially when it came to ego. He did not tolerate cruelty disguised as honesty. If someone behaved dismissively or condescendingly toward others, Rob addressed it directly. He did not lecture, but he did not ignore it either. That quiet enforcement of respect shaped the culture around him more effectively than rules ever could. Struthers mentioned how Rob interacted with crew members whose work often went unnoticed. He thanked people personally, not ceremonially. He remembered who had stayed late, who had solved problems quietly, who had stepped in without being asked. Those acknowledgments were not broadcast, but they were deeply felt. People noticed that he noticed. She also reflected on Rob's emotional steadiness. He did not swing wildly between moods depending on success or stress. Even during difficult productions, he remained recognizable as himself. That predictability created trust. People did not brace themselves for sudden outbursts or dramatic shifts. They knew what kind of person they would encounter each day. As Struthers spoke, it became clear that what she admired most was not Rob's talent alone, but his reliability as a human being. In an industry where personas shift and alliances change quickly, Rob remained grounded. He did not reinvent himself to suit trends or protect relevance. He trusted that integrity would outlast attention. She also addressed the way Rob spoke about others when they were not present. He did not tear people down to bond with those in the room. If he criticized someone, it was done thoughtfully and without cruelty. More often, he defended people who were being misunderstood or judged unfairly. That instinct, she said, revealed his values more clearly than any public statement. In the end, Struthers explained that working with Rob Reiner changed her expectations of leadership. He showed her that authority does not require intimidation, that excellence does not require fear, and that success does not excuse disregard for others. Those lessons stayed with her long after the projects ended. What she revealed was not a contradiction of his public image, but a deeper layer beneath it. Behind the scenes, Rob Reiner was not louder, harsher, or more demanding than the world imagined. He was quieter, steadier, and more principled. And for those who worked alongside him, that was the version that mattered most. As Sally Struthers went deeper in her memories, she focused on moments that never made it into interviews or retrospectives, moments that existed only for those present when the cameras were off and expectations were lowered. She explained that Rob Reiner had an unusual relationship with silence. He did not rush to fill it, and he did not fear it. In meetings, pauses were allowed to stretch naturally, giving people space to think rather than forcing immediate responses. That patience, she said, revealed a confidence that did not need constant reinforcement. She recalled how Rob handled emotionally difficult subject matter with restraint. Rather than dramatizing seriousness, he approached it with quiet respect. He reminded people that heavy themes did not require heavy-handed behavior. When scenes involved pain, conflict, or vulnerability, he encouraged honesty over intensity. He believed that truth carried more weight than volume. That philosophy shaped not only performances, but the atmosphere around them. Struthers also spoke about Rob's relationship with time. He did not treat it as something to dominate or race against, but as something to manage thoughtfully. If a conversation needed to happen, he allowed it to happen, even if it disrupted schedules. If someone needed rest, he adjusted rather than pushed. That flexibility, she said, came from understanding that exhaustion produces diminishing returns. Both creatively and personally. One detail she found particularly telling was how Rob reacted when praise was directed at him. He accepted it politely, but redirected it quickly. Compliments made him slightly uncomfortable, not because he lacked confidence, but because he disliked imbalance. He believed success was collective, and any narrative that centered him alone felt incomplete. This habit, Struthers noted, was not performative humility. It was instinctive. She also described how Rob responded to conflict between others. He did not avoid it, but he did not escalate it either. When disagreements surfaced, he acted as a stabilizing presence. He listened carefully, reframed issues calmly, and guided people toward solutions without assigning moral weight. That approach prevented divisions from hardening into resentment. Struthers remembered one particularly tense moment when creative opinions clashed sharply. Voices were raised, frustration was visible, and the room felt on edge. Rob did not intervene immediately. He allowed the energy to peak, then spoke quietly, drawing attention back to shared goals rather than individual positions. The tension dissolved not because he asserted authority, but because he restored perspective. She emphasized how rare that skill was. Many leaders confuse control with effectiveness. Rob understood that control often produces compliance, not commitment. He wanted people invested, not obedient. That distinction influenced everything from casting decisions to daily interactions. Another aspect Struthers highlighted was Rob's emotional honesty. He did not pretend to be unaffected by difficulty. If something weighed on him, it showed, but it never spilled outward destructively. He modeled how to carry responsibility without projecting it onto others. That modeling, she said, taught people how to manage their own stress more healthfully. She also noted that Rob never separated kindness from professionalism, as if the two were incompatible. He believed that being considerate did not weaken authority. In fact, he believed it strengthened it. People worked harder for him not because they feared him, but because they respected him. Struthers reflected on how these qualities stood in contrast to industry norms she had grown accustomed to. She had seen talent paired with volatility, brilliance paired with cruelty. Rob challenged that pattern simply by existing differently. He did not lecture about values. He practiced them. As she spoke, it became clear that what stayed with her most was the sense of emotional safety he created. Safety to fail, safety to speak, safety to be imperfect. That environment allowed creativity to breathe. It also allowed people to leave work without carrying residual harm. She acknowledged that Rob was not flawless. He could be stubborn. He had strong opinions. But even his firmness was guided by principle rather than ego. When he disagreed, it was about ideas, not people. That separation mattered deeply to those around him. In reflecting on his legacy behind the scenes, Struthers concluded that Rob Reiner's true influence was not limited to films or performances. It lived in the standards he set for how people treat one another when no audience is present. That influence, she said, outlasts any project. What she revealed was a portrait of leadership grounded in restraint, empathy, and consistency. A man who understood that power is most effective when it is least visible. And for those who worked with him, that invisible strength defined who he really was. That A.S. Sally Struthers continued. She began to describe how Rob Reiner behaved when no creative outcome was at stake at all, when there was nothing to gain professionally and no audience to impress. It was in these moments, she said, that his character became clearest. During downtime, he did not retreat into isolation or hierarchy. He remained accessible, often joining casual conversations without steering them toward work. He was curious about people's lives beyond the set, asking about families, worries, and hopes with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. She explained that Rob had an unusual ability to make people feel seen without placing pressure on them. He did not demand emotional openness, but he made room for it. If someone chose to share something personal, he listened fully. If they did not, he respected that boundary completely. There was never a sense that intimacy was expected or required. That balance, she said, created trust organically. Struthers also recalled how Rob reacted to praise directed at others. When someone delivered a strong performance or solved a difficult problem, he acknowledged it immediately and specifically. He did not rely on vague compliments. He explained exactly what had worked and why it mattered. That specificity made recognition feel earned rather than ceremonial. People understood that when Rob praised something, it was because he had paid attention. She noted that he had little tolerance for performative behavior. When someone attempted to dominate attention or undermine others to elevate themselves, Rob did not respond with confrontation, but with withdrawal of validation. He redirected focus back to the work and the group. Over time, those behaviors either adjusted or disappeared. His influence reshaped behavior without public reprimand. Another memory that stayed with her involved how Rob handled moments of personal doubt. He did not pretend to be immune to uncertainty. When faced with difficult decisions, he sometimes admitted that he was still thinking, still weighing options. That transparency, Struthers said, gave others permission to acknowledge their own uncertainty without shame. It created a culture where thinking was valued over posturing. She also spoke about Rob's relationship with ambition. He was driven, but not desperate. He cared deeply about quality, but he did not chase relevance for its own sake. That calm confidence influenced those around him. People felt less pressure to prove themselves constantly. Instead, they focused on contributing meaningfully. Struthers observed that Rob rarely spoke badly about people who were not present. Even when someone caused problems, he framed issues around behavior rather than character. He believed that labeling people as difficult or flawed closed the door to improvement. This approach did not excuse harm, but it avoided unnecessary cruelty. She remembered how Rob treated newcomers, especially those entering the industry for the first time. He did not test them or assert dominance. He oriented them patiently, explaining processes that others assumed were obvious. He understood how overwhelming, unfamiliar environments could be and adjusted accordingly. That kindness often went unnoticed publicly, but it shaped careers quietly. Struthers also highlighted his sense of proportion. When things went wrong, he did not inflate their significance. He reminded people that mistakes were not moral failures. Conversely, when things went well, he did not exaggerate success. This steadiness protected people from emotional extremes that often accompany creative work. One subtle detail she mentioned was how Rob ended days. He did not leave abruptly or disappear in a status. He checked in, thanked people, and closed the loop emotionally as well as logistically. That sense of completion helped people separate work from life more cleanly, reducing burnout. She acknowledged that these qualities might sound simple, even ordinary, but in her experience they were rare. Many environments normalized stress, ego, and fear. Rob normalized respect, patience, and accountability. That normalization changed what people expected and accepted elsewhere. As she reflected further, Struthers said that working with Rob reshaped her internal compass. It reminded her that success did not have to come at the expense of humanity, that leadership could be firm without being harsh, that authority could coexist with humility. She also addressed the idea that kindness in powerful positions is often dismissed as weakness. Rob disproved that assumption repeatedly. He was respected not because he demanded it, but because he earned it consistently. People listened to him because they trusted his intentions. In describing him behind the scenes, Struthers made it clear that there was no hidden darkness waiting to be revealed, no contradiction between public and private selves. The man people admired from afar was, if anything, more grounded and thoughtful in close proximity. She concluded that Rob Reiner's greatest impact may never be fully measured. It lived not only in films or performances, but in the professional standards he quietly modeled. Standards that people carried with them into other spaces, influencing others in ways that traced back to him without his name attached. That, she said, was who he really was when the spotlight moved away. Steady, attentive, principled, and unwaveringly human. Sally Struthers continued her reflections. She began focusing on the emotional residue Rob Reiner left behind, the kind that lingered long after projects wrapped and people scattered to new jobs. She explained that his influence did not fade once the work ended. Instead, it followed people quietly, shaping how they behaved in rooms where his name was never mentioned. That, she believed, was the clearest sign of genuine leadership. She described how former colleagues often referenced Rob indirectly, saying things like, "That's how Rob would have handled it," or "I learned that from working with him." Even years later, these references were never nostalgic or performative. They surfaced naturally in moments of decision, when people were choosing how to treat others under pressure. His presence remained embedded in their instincts. Struthers emphasized that Rob never positioned himself as a moral authority. He did not give speeches about ethics or professionalism. He modeled them so consistently that others absorbed them without realizing it. In her view, that was why his impact endured. It was learned behavior, not imposed doctrine. She spoke about how Rob approached difficult personalities. Rather than labeling people as impossible, he looked for context. He asked what pressures they were under, what insecurities might be driving their behavior. This did not mean he excused harmful actions, but he sought understanding before judgment. That approach often softened conflicts before they escalated. Another point she returned to was Rob's relationship with success. He did not cling to past achievements or use them as leverage. Each project began on equal footing, regardless of accolades. That humility reset power dynamics immediately. People felt free to contribute without feeling overshadowed by legacy. Struthers recalled how Rob reacted when things went unexpectedly well. He did not rush to claim victory or seek recognition. Instead, he treated success as confirmation of teamwork rather than proof of superiority. That framing prevented complacency and arrogance from taking root. She also noted how Rob handled disappointment. When projects failed to meet expectations, he did not spiral into blame or defensiveness. He analyzed what went wrong calmly, then moved forward. That emotional regulation set a tone of resilience rather than despair. One of the most personal observations Struthers shared involved Rob's sense of responsibility. He did not see leadership as privilege, but as obligation. If something went wrong on his watch, he felt accountable even when the mistake was not directly his. That accountability built trust quickly and deeply. She explained that Rob never treated kindness as currency. He did not expect loyalty in exchange for decency. People chose to support him because they believed in him, not because they owed him. That distinction mattered greatly to her. Struthers also spoke about Rob's ability to compartmentalize without becoming detached. He understood when to focus intensely on work and when to step back. He did not blur boundaries in ways that confused or exhausted others. That clarity protected both productivity and well-being. She mentioned how Rob responded to changing industry norms. He adapted thoughtfully without chasing trends. He evaluated new ideas on their merits rather than their popularity. That discernment kept his work grounded while allowing it to evolve. Another subtle but powerful quality she noted was his patience with growth. He did not expect people to arrive fully formed. He allowed room for learning, for mistakes, for gradual improvement. That patience fostered loyalty and confidence. Struthers reflected on how these qualities had contrasted sharply with environments driven by fear and competition. In those spaces, people guarded themselves constantly. Around Rob, people relaxed. They took creative risks. They spoke honestly. That openness elevated the work in ways metrics could not capture. She acknowledged that such environments require effort to maintain. Rob invested that effort daily. He did not assume culture would sustain itself. He paid attention to dynamics, addressed issues early, and reinforced values through action. As she spoke, it became clear that Rob's behind-the-scenes presence was not passive. It was actively stabilizing. He absorbed tension, redirected energy, and kept focus on what mattered most. Struthers concluded that Rob Reiner's true legacy might never be fully visible to audiences. It lived in the careers he influenced quietly, the standards he normalized, and the countless moments where someone chose empathy over ego because they had seen it modeled firsthand. Behind the scenes, he was not trying to be extraordinary. He was trying to be decent, consistent, and fair. And in an industry where those qualities are often compromised, that choice made all the difference. As Sally Struthers reflected further, she turned her attention to how Rob Reiner behaved in moments when authority was tested, when pressure mounted and outcomes were uncertain. She explained that these moments revealed more about him than any success ever could. Under stress, Rob did not become louder or more controlling. Instead, he became more deliberate. His voice softened, his pace slowed, and his focus narrowed to what actually mattered. That shift alone, she said, often changed the entire direction of a room. She recalled situations where financial constraints, schedule conflicts, or creative disagreements threatened to derail progress. In those moments, Rob resisted the temptation to assert power simply because he could. He asked questions instead of issuing commands. He invited solutions rather than demanding compliance. That approach transformed obstacles into shared problems rather than personal failures. Struthers noted that Rob had a remarkable ability to distinguish urgency from importance. He understood that not every problem required immediate resolution, and that rushing decisions often created more damage than delay. When others panicked, he grounded them by reframing priorities. This steadiness prevented emotional escalation and preserved trust even in difficult circumstances. She also spoke about Rob's sense of accountability during conflict. If tension arose between departments or individuals, he did not distance himself from it. He stepped into the discomfort calmly, acknowledging emotions without validating harmful behavior. He believed that unresolved tension poisoned collaboration, and he treated emotional maintenance as part of his responsibility. Another quality that stood out to Struthers was Rob's fairness. He did not play favorites or protect status. When disagreements occurred, he evaluated arguments based on substance rather than hierarchy. That fairness encouraged honesty. People spoke openly because they knew their voices would be weighed seriously regardless of position. She described how Rob handled moments of failure publicly. If something went wrong, he addressed it directly with the group rather than deflecting blame. He framed mistakes as collective learning opportunities, not personal shortcomings. This approach reduced defensiveness and encouraged growth. Struthers also observed that Rob never used pressure as a motivational tool. He did not threaten consequences to extract performance. He believed fear produced shallow results. Instead, he motivated through clarity. When people understood why their work mattered, they committed more fully. She recalled how Rob navigated generational differences on set. Rather than dismissing new perspectives, he invited them. He remained curious about evolving ideas and methods, even when they challenged his own experience. That openness kept his leadership relevant without sacrificing principles. Another subtle but powerful trait Struthers mentioned was Rob's restraint in moments of praise or criticism. He avoided extremes. He did not inflate accomplishments or catastrophize mistakes. This emotional moderation created stability, allowing people to focus on work rather than emotional fallout. She also highlighted how Rob treated moments of uncertainty. When answers were not immediately clear, he admitted it. That honesty built credibility. People trusted him more because he did not pretend omniscience. He valued truth over image. Struthers reflected on how these behaviors contrasted sharply with industry norms. She had seen environments where pressure bred cruelty, where authority silenced creativity, and where fear masqueraded as discipline. Rob's approach disrupted those patterns simply by refusing to participate in them. She emphasized that Rob's leadership was not passive or indulgent. He maintained standards rigorously. Expectations were clear. Accountability was real. But enforcement came through respect rather than intimidation. That balance sustained both excellence and morale. One of the most lasting impressions Struthers shared was how Rob handled endings. When projects concluded, he did not disappear. He acknowledged contributions thoughtfully, closing relationships with intention. That sense of closure mattered. It allowed people to move on without unresolved tension. She also spoke about how Rob's presence influenced her personally. Working with him reaffirmed her belief that decency and success are not mutually exclusive. It reminded her that authority can be exercised without harm, and that leadership can elevate rather than diminish those around it. She summed up these reflections. Struthers made it clear that Rob Reiner's behind-the-scenes character was not defined by charisma or dominance. It was defined by restraint, fairness, and responsibility. He did not need to prove his power. He used it carefully. In her view, this was why people trusted him instinctively. They knew that decisions would be made thoughtfully, that mistakes would be handled humanely, and that dignity would be preserved even under pressure. What she revealed was not a hidden persona, but a disciplined one. A man who understood that influence carries weight, and who chose to carry it without causing harm. That choice shaped countless working lives quietly and enduringly. Behind the scenes, Rob Reiner was not simply effective. He was reliable in the deepest sense. And for those who experienced that reliability, it changed what leadership looked like forever. As Sally Struthers moved toward the later years of Rob Reiner's career, her reflections became more introspective, less about specific incidents, and more about the cumulative weight of having known someone for so long in an industry defined by impermanence. She explained that longevity in Hollywood often changes people in corrosive ways, slowly replacing curiosity with cynicism and generosity with defensiveness. What struck her about Rob was how little that corrosion seemed to take hold. She described how, even after decades of success, Rob continued to approach new projects with beginner's curiosity rather than veteran entitlement. He did not assume he had all the answers simply because of past achievements. Instead, he treated experience as context, not authority. That distinction, she said, kept him open rather than rigid. Struthers recalled conversations where Rob openly questioned his own assumptions, inviting debate rather than shutting it down. He was willing to revise ideas if better ones emerged, regardless of their source. This openness was not insecurity. It was confidence rooted in trust that truth mattered more than pride. She also spoke about how Rob navigated aging in an industry obsessed with youth. Rather than chasing relevance or disguising change, he acknowledged it. He adjusted his pace, his focus, and his expectations without resentment. That acceptance allowed him to remain engaged without becoming bitter or performative. One aspect that deeply impressed Struthers was how Rob spoke about responsibility as his influence grew. He understood that his words carried more weight over time, and he adjusted accordingly. He became more careful, not less honest, recognizing that impact mattered as much as intent. This awareness shaped how he communicated privately and publicly. She noted that Rob never used mentorship as a branding exercise. He did not position himself as a guru or seek recognition for guidance he offered. When he supported younger colleagues, It was done quietly, often without them realizing they were being mentored at all. He asked questions, offered perspective, and stepped back. Growth was allowed to belong to the person experiencing it. Struthers reflected on how Rob handled legacy conversations. When others brought up his past work, he acknowledged it without dwelling. He preferred discussing current ideas rather than reliving former successes. This forward orientation kept him engaged with the present rather than anchored to nostalgia. She also spoke about Rob's evolving relationship with power. Early in his career, power had been something to manage carefully. Later, it became something he actively diffused. He shared decision-making, encouraged autonomy, and trusted others more readily. This shift reduced dependency and increased collective ownership. Another quality that emerged over time was his compassion for exhaustion. Rob understood how long careers strain people emotionally and physically. He did not dismiss fatigue as weakness. He treated it as information, a signal that something needed adjustment. This sensitivity protected people from burnout and resentment. Struthers emphasized that Rob's integrity did not come from perfection. He made mistakes. He misjudged situations. But when he did, he acknowledged them without deflection. Apologies were direct and unqualified. There was no attempt to preserve image at the expense of accountability. That honesty deepened respect rather than diminishing it. She recalled moments when Rob chose restraint over retaliation. In situations where others might have responded defensively or publicly, he chose silence or private conversation. This restraint prevented escalation and preserved dignity on all sides. It also reinforced his belief that not every conflict needed an audience. Struthers also highlighted how Rob treated endings in relationships. When collaborations concluded, he did not sever connection abruptly. He maintained warmth without obligation, allowing relationships to evolve naturally rather than through rupture. This approach reduced bitterness and preserved mutual respect. As she spoke, it became clear that Rob's behind-the-scenes character matured rather than hardened over time. Experience did not narrow him. It widened him. He became more patient, more reflective, and more intentional. These qualities were not accidental. They were practiced. She noted that Rob often spoke about the importance of leaving spaces better than he found them, not just physically, but emotionally. He believed that work environments should not damage people. This belief guided his decisions consistently, even when it required extra effort. Struthers reflected on how rare it is to encounter someone whose private behavior aligns so closely with their public values. There was no gap to reconcile, no hidden self to explain away. The Rob Reiner people admired publicly was the same Rob Reiner who showed up quietly every day in her final assessment. She said that what Rob was really like behind the scenes could be summarized simply. He was deliberate where others were reactive. He was fair where others were expedient. He was humane where others were transactional. These choices, repeated over decades, defined him more than any single achievement. For Struthers, knowing him reshaped her understanding of what lasting influence looks like. It is not loud, is not dramatic, is steady, ethical, and deeply human. And that, she said, was the real Rob Reiner, the one whose impact would continue long after the applause faded. Yes, Sally Struthers brought her reflections closer to the present. She spoke about how Rob Reiner's absence has altered the emotional landscape for those who work closely with him. It was not the absence of a celebrity that people felt most strongly, she explained, but the absence of a stabilizing presence. Rob had been someone others instinctively looked toward in moments of uncertainty, not because he demanded authority, but because he offered clarity without judgment. She described how, after his passing, colleagues found themselves pausing in difficult situations, almost unconsciously asking what approach he would have taken. That pause, she said, was itself a testament to his influence. He had taught people to slow down, to assess before reacting, and to consider the human cost of every decision. Even in his absence, those habits persisted. Struthers emphasized that Rob never framed decency as sacrifice. He did not act as though kindness required martyrdom or personal loss. Instead, He demonstrated that humane leadership often produced better outcomes for everyone involved. People worked harder, stayed longer, and cared more deeply when they felt respected. That was not idealism. It was observable reality. She also spoke about how Rob approached disagreement late in his career. Rather than defending positions reflexively, he became increasingly interested in understanding opposing perspectives. He did not see disagreement as threat, but as information. This openness allowed conversations to remain constructive even when opinions diverged sharply. Another detail Struthers shared was how Rob treated moments of personal transition. When people moved on to new projects or left the industry entirely, he supported those decisions without resentment. He did not interpret departure as betrayal. He believed that growth sometimes required change, and he respected that process. She recalled how Rob responded to gratitude. When people thanked him for guidance or support, he accepted it quietly, without false modesty or dismissal. He acknowledged the connection, but did not dwell on it. Gratitude, to him, was something to receive respectfully, not to collect. Struthers also highlighted how Rob balanced conviction with humility. He held strong views, but he did not assume they were universally correct. He remained open to revision when evidence or experience suggested otherwise. This flexibility did not weaken his principles. It strengthened them. She noted that Rob's behind-the-scenes presence was particularly impactful for women in the industry. He did not patronize or overcorrect. He treated competence as given, not exceptional. That baseline respect created space for genuine collaboration rather than performative support. Another aspect that lingered for Struthers was Rob's emotional literacy. He recognized emotional dynamics without dramatizing them. He understood when people needed reassurance and when they needed space. This sensitivity was not intrusive. It was responsive. She spoke about how Rob handled moments of disappointment in others. When expectations were not met, he addressed the issue directly, but without contempt. He separated behavior from identity, allowing room for correction without humiliation. This approach preserved relationships while maintaining standards. Struthers reflected on how Rob's approach contrasted with environments driven by fear of failure. Around him, failure was treated as part of process rather than proof of inadequacy. This mindset encouraged experimentation and innovation. People felt free to explore rather than perform defensively. She also mentioned Rob's sense of humor, which remained understated even in later years. He used it sparingly, never to deflect responsibility or belittle others. Humor served as a connective tissue, easing tension and reminding people of shared humanity. As she continued, Struthers made it clear that Rob's influence did not depend on proximity. Even those who worked with him briefly felt its effects. His standards were clear from the start. He did not require long exposure to leave an impression. She also addressed the misconception that gentleness equates to lack of ambition. Rob was ambitious, she said, but his ambition was oriented toward quality rather than dominance. He wanted work to matter, not to overwhelm. That distinction guided his choices consistently. Struthers acknowledged that Rob's way of working was not always the easiest path. It required patience, attention, and emotional effort, but it was sustainable. It did not burn people out or leave damage in its wake. That sustainability, she believed, was his greatest achievement. She concluded this part of her reflection. Struthers returned to the idea of legacy. Not legacy as reputation, but legacy as practice. The practices Rob normalized continued to ripple outward through those who had worked with him, shaping environments far beyond his direct reach. Behind the scenes, Rob Reiner was not simply admired. He was trusted. And in an industry where trust is fragile, that trust became the quiet foundation of his enduring influence. As Sally Struthers reached the end of her reflections, she made it clear that what she revealed was never meant to revise Rob Reiner's public image, but to complete it. The world had known his voice, his convictions, and his creative achievements. What it had not always seen was the daily discipline required to live those values consistently when no one was watching. That discipline, she said, was where his true character lived. She spoke about how rare it is to encounter someone whose private conduct does not contradict their public principles. In Rob's case, there was no adjustment required when the spotlight disappeared. He did not become harsher, colder, or more dismissive behind closed doors. If anything, he became more attentive. The absence of an audience allowed him to focus fully on people rather than perception. Struthers reflected on how that consistency shaped trust. People trusted Rob, not because he promised anything extraordinary, but because he delivered reliability. He showed up prepared. He listened carefully. He treated people fairly. Over time, those simple actions accumulated into something profound. They created environments where people felt safe enough to do their best work without sacrificing their well-being. She also acknowledged that Rob's way of working demanded more effort than shortcuts built on fear or ego. It required emotional awareness, patience, and a willingness to absorb tension rather than deflect it. Many leaders avoided that labor. Rob accepted it as part of responsibility. That acceptance, she believed, was the source of his lasting influence. As she spoke, Struthers emphasized that Rob never framed himself as exceptional for behaving this way. He believed decency was a baseline, not an achievement. He did not expect praise for it, nor did he tolerate excuses for abandoning it. This quiet expectation shaped the people around him more effectively than any rulebook. She noted that even now, long after working with him, she still carries his example into new spaces. When confronted with difficult dynamics, she remembers how Rob slowed down rather than escalated. When faced with disagreement, she recalls how he listened before responding. These memories function less like nostalgia and more like guidance. Struthers concluded by saying that Rob Reiner's real legacy behind the scenes was not a secret personality or hidden truth. It was a pattern of behavior sustained over decades. A pattern that proved leadership does not require intimidation, that success does not require cruelty, and that authority does not require distance. That I enter final words. She said that if people wanted to understand who Rob Reiner really was, they should look not at how loudly he spoke in public, but at how carefully he listened in private. That, she believed, revealed everything that mattered.